Hey everybody, it's Rafi at Zurb, and I got another great video for you. This one is on the Flexbox grid in Foundation. Now if you haven't used Flexbox before, you really should. We've been using it on a ton of projects lately and it's excellent. It's really saving us a lot of time and a lot of code. In fact, the new building block site is also built completely on Flexbox. So we have a Flex grid in Foundation, which we're going to go over in this video. So the browser support for Flexbox is actually really good, so you can use it now. So if we hop over to Can I Use, then you can see that the browser support is really great across the board, including Internet Explorer. We're using the vendor prefixes, or if you're using the Zurb stack SaaS version, it has auto prefixer, so it's automatically prefixing all your code there, so you can use an IE11 as well. So there's a lot of things that you could do with the Flexbox grid. There's a lot of advantages. I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple ways to get started with it, and then I'll show you how the grid itself works, how it's similar to the old float grid, and how it's also different than the float grid and how many more things it can do. So you're going to really like this. Let's jump into it. So one way you can get started with the Flexbox grid is if you are using the standard CSS version of Foundation, you can go to the Foundation website, click Download Foundation 6, and you'll be taken to this page. That's foundation.zurb.com/sites/download.html. And from here you can use the custom downloader. So the custom downloader allows you to get a customized version of Foundation, so you can change some of the things up, omit things that you don't need or that you won't use. So we have some grid options here. So if you simply just wanted everything in Foundation but you wanted the Flex grid, and you just click on that and then scroll to the bottom and hit Download Custom Build. And so that's going to download for you, and now you're going to have a custom Flexbox version of Foundation CSS. Now, if we're using the Zurb stack and Foundation, or the SaaS version of Foundation, then there's a way to do that as well, and we'll show you how to do that right now. So I just created a brand new SaaS version of Foundation. I chose the Zurb stack, of course, because I want all the power that's in the Zurb stack. So now I'm going to get into that file that we just created. So the project is called Flex This. So I'm going to cd into that, and I'm going to run npm start. So I'm going to let that run, and I'm going to open that project in my code editor. So let's jump ahead and do that. Okay, so I have this brand new Zurb stack project open in my code editor, and I now want to hop over and initialize the Flexbox grid. So in a later version of Foundation, 6.4 to be exact, the Flexbox grid is actually going to be the default grid. Until then, let's go ahead and swap that over. So we're going to open up our source file where all our working files are, and then we're going to hop into the assets folder, and then SCSS, and app.scss. So in the app.scss, this is where we're controlling all the classes that are being included in Foundation. So you can see that there's one that's commented out. It's @include Foundation Flex grid. So we're going to comment that in. And now we're going to comment out the Foundation grid. And that's important because you don't want both of them included at the same time, because then the classes will conflict with each other. So we'll go ahead and swap those. And while we're here, we're going to go ahead and also swap in the Foundation Flex classes. So that's also commented out by default, but again, later in 6.4, those are going to be the default classes, and float will be an option if you need to support an older browser. So we'll go ahead and save that. So now we have the Flexbox grid enabled in Foundation. And just one extra little tidbit, you don't have to do this, but it's pretty cool. If you want to use all the Flexbox properties, we'll hop into the settings file and we'll enable the Flexbox mode for components. So we have a variable here called global Flexbox, and we'll set that to true. And when we save that, now all of our components that use Flexbox will use Flexbox. So things like menus and accordions and tabs can now all use Flexbox, button groups, things like that. And so what that means is you get to use some of those Flexbox helper classes that are built into Foundation, along with all the Flexbox properties that normally come with Flexbox. So making a group of components equal width and fill the entire width of a container. That's some really powerful stuff that you could do with Flexbox. Now we're going to go ahead and introduce you to the Flexbox grid. Alrighty, so the Flexbox grid is really powerful, and there's a lot of things that it can do that the standard float grid cannot do. So let's go through some of those differences. One thing that you could do with the Flexbox grid is automatically size columns inside of a row. So you can have columns be equal width without actually explicitly setting a width to them. You can also have columns be automatic width or just fill in the remaining space. So this is going to come really in handy when you want to have certain columns that are sized and then other columns that can just expand and contract depending on the available space. You can also align your columns left, right, middle, or justified. And justified means that if you have less than 12 columns, you can actually space those columns apart from each other, left and right, or even, and then have one in the middle as well. So a bunch of different configurations with that. You can even do space around, which is a Flexbox property. I'll show you that. Also, you can align your columns vertically. So the content in your column inside of your rows can be aligned vertically, which is your columns. So you can have them aligned to the top, middle, or bottom. And then source ordering is really easy with the Flexbox grid, and it's even simpler than it is with the float grid. So setting up a basic Flexbox grid is done with rows and columns. So this is exactly like the syntax that you might be used to if you've used Foundation's float grid before, or standard grid. So again, rows and columns. Now this configuration, rows and columns here, will actually make 3 columns that are equal width, and they'll all be 1/3 of the width because there's 3 of them. So that's 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3. That's going to fill the 100% of your row. So it's going to look something like this. Now notice that without any extra classes, these columns want to sit next to each other horizontally, and they're equal width to each other. So there's no sizing classes yet on this, and so they are equal width, which is really awesome if this is the kind of setup that you want. Now, if I reduce the number of columns, it's automatically going to remain equal width. So both of these, now there's only 2 columns, they'll both be 50% width, instead of in this example where they're 1/3 or 33.333%. And if I add more columns, the Flexbox grid will automatically adjust for that, and the columns will now split their width evenly again. So now they're each 1/4 of the row width. So that's 25%. And the other nice thing too is you're not constrained to 12 columns anymore. Now, it is still a 12-column grid, but what this means is if I put 20 of these columns into this row, they'll actually sit horizontally next to each other and divide their space by 20. So let's take a look at an example. Okay, so I just want to show you I have some styles here on these columns, and I just want to show you how these columns work. So if I add more columns, you see that they continue to split their width evenly within this row. Now again, I haven't added any sizing classes yet. I will show you that in a little bit. But if I reduce the number of columns, they're going to split their width evenly. So this is really a nice feature if this is the type of layout that you want. So now we have sizing classes for our Flexbox grid. And this is just like the Foundation 6 float grid. The sizing classes work very much the same way. So we have our row and our columns here, but the first column is medium 6. So on a medium screen, we want it to be 1/2 of the width of the container of the row. And then 2 more columns there, both medium 3, so they're both going to be 1/3. So that adds up to 100%. As you can see, it would look something like this, where the first column is 1/2 and the other 2 are 1/4. Now there's another way you could set up this layout without the sizing classes. So just like this, we have our one column, the first column has a sizing class on it, so it's medium 6. So we're saying, yeah, for sure you're going to take up 1/2 of the space of the row. But the other 2 columns there, they don't have sizing classes on them. So they're going to automatically take up the remaining space and be even width to each other. And so again, this is nice. I'm typing less code, I'm typing in less classes, but also these things are auto-sizing each other, so that could be very helpful. So here I have these remaining 2 columns on the right that don't need a sizing class. They'll just split the remaining width evenly between each other. So we'll take a look at an example of that. Okay, so this is the exact same example here. So I have medium 6 on the first column. Now I can make this anything. Let's make it medium 9. And you can see that the last 2 columns that don't have sizing classes, they're just going to take up the remaining space and split their width evenly between each other. If I get rid of column number 3, you can see that column number 2 still takes up the remaining space as it would, because it has no sizing class. It's just going to take up any remaining space. So I can make this a 3, and then column 2 will now take up that extra remaining space, whatever it is. And then if I add a bunch more columns in here that are not sized, then I could definitely continue on with this and have them split their width evenly. So here there's 4 columns with no sizing classes. The first one I want for sure to be 3 columns wide, so I am putting a sizing class on there. All right, and then you can also make columns shrink. So what we were just witnessing before was that columns are going to grow to take up the remaining space available. But if you want a column to shrink and only take up the width of the content inside of it and any padding, then the shrink class will do that. And that's actually using a flex property, a flex shrink property. So in this example, we have the first column here has a shrink class on it, and the second column has no sizing class. And so by default, that second column is going to take up the remaining space. The first column is going to shrink. And so that means it's only going to take up the amount of space as the text inside of it in this case, or whatever content that would be, and the padding that is around it. Now, if I make that content smaller, you could see that it's going to shrink down, the first column is, and then the second column will expand to take up the rest of that space. So the second column is growing while the first column is shrinking, and that's because of that shrink class. So again, this could be really helpful for something that you might want sized to shrink. Things like a logo or maybe a button or something like that. Whereas this rest section over here, the section on the right, could be maybe like a form or like a search form. And that's something that can grow and shrink depending on the available space, and who cares? So we'll take a look at another example of that. So this is an example of another use case for the shrink class. So we have this on a layout. So here we have 2 columns. So the first column has shrink on it, and it is this sidebar that you see here. And the next column has no sizing class on it, so it's just going to take up the remaining space. Now the difference here is, again, that shrink means it's only going to take up the amount of space as the content inside of it and any padding. If I got rid of the shrink class, now none of these columns have any sizing on them, you can see that they're both going to now split their width evenly inside of that row. So that's the difference. That's what the shrink class does. Very powerful. Now we can also align our columns horizontally or vertically using Flexbox. And so we're going to go through some of the horizontal alignments here. So you can align left, well that's default. But definitely the align right class is helpful, and the align center class, which you'll see. Now an important thing about the Flexbox grid and just Flexbox in general is that Flexbox works on a parent-child relationship. So the parent here is the row, and the parent controls the behavior of the children. So if we're going to put an align right class on the parent, that means the children will obey that, that designation. So they're going to align to the right, as you can see here. So I have align right on the parent, the children will now behave and move over to the right. So that is the parent-child relationship of Flexbox. Flexbox, you control the behavior of the children mostly at the parent level. So these are 2 medium 4 columns. They don't add up to 12, as you can see, so there's an empty gap here on the left, and that's because we're aligning these 2 columns to the right. This is really powerful because there's a lot less code you need to achieve this kind of layout. In the float grid, you would need a little bit more markup to do something like this, especially this. So if I want to align things to the center, I can add the align center class on the parent, which is the row, and now the children columns will align themselves to the middle. So here's 2 medium 4 columns aligned to the middle, and no matter what screen size you're going to be on, they're going to align to the middle or center. And of course we have align justify. So this is using the Flexbox property, justify content, space between. And so if you put align justify on the parent row, the children will now space apart from each other. And you can actually add more columns into the mix here, and they'll all space apart from each other, with the 2 outside columns being to the left and to the right as far as they can, like this. So it's basically like opposing magnets. This is actually really powerful for creating layouts and UI as well. So we use a lot of Flexbox to build, components like cards and other things, and this really comes in handy, as you can see here. And of course there's align space. So this uses the Flexbox property justify content space between. And so align space will now actually create even space between each of the columns. So on the left edge, on the right edge of the column, and left and right on the other column. So now they're spaced between evenly. So let's play around with an example here of that. So I have a bunch of these layouts that we just talked about. Now the thing I want to convey here is that the nice thing is Flexbox will still align these items no matter how many columns you have inside of them. So if I go 4, 4, 4 on this first row up here, that's actually going to fill up 12 columns, so you can't really see the effect of aligning to the right. But let's say I made these a little bit smaller, so there's some a little extra space there. So I'm going to make them all 2, and then, oops, there we go. I'm going to make them all 2. Now they're going to align to the right. So it doesn't matter how many columns you add. And same thing here for align center. That's, again, horizontal alignment to the center. I can make this a 3. I can make this a 1. And, you know, together they'll be aligned to the middle. Now, maybe 1 is a little small for that text there. They don't have to be the same size, but it'll still figure out the center alignment of these 2 columns together. Now, that's pretty cool. And align justify works very much the same way. So I'm going to add another column in here. I'm going to make this 2. I'm going to make this 3. I'm going to make this 2. And you'll see that they'll all be spaced apart from each other. The 2 outer columns are going to be up against the edge. And it's the same for the align spaced. You can add more columns. They're going to have an equal amount of space in between them. So already a lot of really cool stuff that the float grid cannot do. It cannot do these things without extra wrappers and extra classes and other things like that. And probably the most powerful thing in Flexbox, we use it a lot, is the vertical alignment. So you can actually align your columns inside of your row to the top, middle, or bottom. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So we have an example here with the class of align top. Now align top is actually, you would think it's the default value, but it's not actually the default value. The default value for rows and columns is for a column to actually stretch to fill the entire height of a row. Now that's actually a really cool thing in Flexbox, is that columns want to be equal height to each other inside of a row. And so creating equal height columns is really easy in the Flexbox grid. Now you can override that using these vertical alignment classes. So in this example here, I have the align middle class on the row. Again, this is the parent controlling the children. And the columns inside of that have medium 6 classes. So they're both going to be horizontally equal width. But one of them has shorter content and one of them has taller content. And you could see that the one that has shorter content is vertically centered to the taller one. And again, that's the same thing with the align bottom class. So you add the align bottom class, now it's going to align the shorter content to the bottom. Of course, the taller one doesn't move because that is what's dictating the height of the row. So that's really awesome that Flexbox automatically figures out the height of the row, and then the columns inside of that can have their own auto height or whatever height that the content inside of them is. And then you can use these classes to align them to the top or the bottom or the middle. So of course, align top is a property that you can use to align it to the top. What that basically does is overrides the default stretching behavior that the foundation columns want to have. So let's take a look at an example here. And I'm just going to show you the default behavior so it's very clear. So I'm going to get rid of the alignment class. So this is the default behavior for Flexbox, which is really awesome. If you want to create equal height columns, this is really easy. Now there is a component in Foundation called Equalizer that does this with JavaScript. Now this is for older browsers that don't support Flexbox, or if you just haven't implemented Flexbox in your layouts. But Flexbox does this out of the box, which is really awesome. Now, I want to override that, and I want this aligned to the top. So now I'm going to align both of these columns to the top. Now, if I add a ton more content in here, you can see that it's more clear that this first column is aligning to the top. Now, if I want to align that to the middle, vertically middle, it's going to align both of these columns to the middle. Now, the reason both of these columns are aligned to the middle and there's actually space vertically is because this row has a height on it. If I got rid of that, then you could see the true default behavior here. So I got rid of that. So now the height of the row is dictated by the tallest column inside of it. Now this is really, again, powerful. So I'm going to continue adding another div in here. Lorem. I'm going to get rid of the sizing classes. We don't need those. All right. So we have 3 columns side by side. There's one really tall column, so you can see that that is dictating the height of the row. The middle column is a little bit shorter, but it's aligned to the middle because of this parent class here, align middle. And then, of course, I have align bottom. So you can see there's a lot of really powerful stuff you could do with the Flex Grid that is really difficult to do without it. So there's even more stuff. Let's take a look at source ordering. So source ordering in the Flex Grid is really easy. Now you can source order in the Foundation Float Grid. It's a little bit more complicated to understand, but the really powerful thing is that you could source order pretty much any column in any spot with Flexbox. And so there's some built-in classes we have here, responsive source ordering, that you could do with the float grid or with the Flex Grid. So let's take a look at what that looks like. And source ordering just means that you could change the order of the elements depending on the screen size. So you can have one image on the left and then text on the right on a large screen, and then on a small screen have the image on the bottom and the text on top, or whatever you want to have it. So the classes are small, medium, or large, and then the word order, and then what order you want them in. First, second, third, fourth, whatever. However many columns you have. So let's take this example here where we have column A and column B. Now the nice thing too here is that in the Flex Grid, I don't need to reorder my code. All I need to do is just put the classes on here to dictate what order these are going to show up on whatever screen size. In the Float Grid, I would actually need to have my code set up the way I would want it on mobile and then rearrange it on larger screens. So I have a div with a class of columns, and then I'm saying on a small screen that column A is going to be order 1. And then on a medium and larger screen, because we're not defining large here, so on a medium screen, it's going to be order 2. And as you can see here, let's say we're on a medium and larger screen, you can see that A is second in the order. And then the other column is, of course, the opposite. Column B is medium order 1, so that means on a medium and larger screen, it's going to be first. And you could do this with more columns as well. So you can really as many columns as you could fit your content in here as you need. You could do small order 1, small order 2, small order 3 in whatever cases that you need. So for this example, we're going to have 3 columns here. So these columns are all 4 columns wide, so they're medium-4. So that means on a medium screen and larger, they're going to be 4 columns wide. And they also have some source ordering on them for medium screens. So column A is medium order 2, column B is medium order 3, so that's why it's over there as third, and then column C is medium order 1. So on a medium and larger screen, it's going to be first in order. Now when I drop down to a small screen, I have some small source ordering classes here. So that means column C is actually small order 1, so that's why it's up top. And it's also small dash 12, so that means it's going to be full width. So the other 2 will stack underneath. And then we have those other 2 columns that are both small 6, so they'll split their width evenly there. And the small order 2 and small order 3, so that's why they're side by side down at the bottom. So let's play around with an example of that here. So I can change these around and really get these to be in any order that I want. So let's look at this bottom set here. So we have C, A, B. So you can see that A is first in code, but on medium, it's actually order 2. So I can swap these around. I can actually make A order 3 and B order 2. And so now they'll swap places on the bottom and C is still up top. So really powerful, easy to use source ordering built into the Foundation FlexGrid. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about the Foundation FlexGrid. There's a lot of stuff you could do with it. It's really powerful for building layouts, and it's also, Flexbox in general is powerful for building UI. Now we have a lot of Flexbox helper classes, which we have another video on, so you could definitely check that out. And we also have documentation for that here on the docs page. So I want you guys to get the most out of Flexbox. Definitely use it. We're enjoying using it here at Zurb, and it's really awesome. If you're looking for a deep dive into Foundation, make sure you check out the Advanced Foundation course. I'll add a link here at the end and down below. So hope to see you in class. Otherwise, enjoy using the Foundation Flexbox grid.